Well, thanks everybody for showing up. Today we're going to be talking about configuring and using custom claims and custom claims providers, actually, in Microsoft Entra ID. This is something that I really think is interesting, and they've made some changes in the interface. So um, this is going to be kind of a short presentation today, I think, but we'll see how it goes. There's a lot of meat to it and not much talk, just most of it's going to be in a demo. And if we can just go to the next slide here. Okay, so what we're going to do is basically, first of all, is go over modern authentication and authorization really quick, because we really need to know how to utilize custom claims and the custom claim providers and why we use them. So it's important to know the sequence of things and how they interrelate with each other with the applications and APIs and things like that. And then I have a demo. I have an application that I wrote to show the power and the capabilities of custom claims. Well, here's our pre-sales slide. Basically, we do lots of things in identity. We're identity experts. Anything that you want to, if you have a need for anything identity related, security related with identity and Azure integration, Entra ID integration, then we're the people to talk to. And that's a little marketing slide that shows you all the things we're involved with. So now we're going to start our modern auth overview here with Microsoft Entra ID. So in the new modern era, basically we have to have a way to secure our digital access, our digital assets. And when we do that, we basically have to have some kind of security platform that needs to identify who or what is trying to access the data. And then we also have to define the data somehow digitally. And once we have that information, then we can put this platform around it to control access. And that's the way that the whole modern auth platform works. That's the common scenario. And basically what we're going to talk about today, what I'm going to talk about today is Entra ID and how Entra ID handles that. And this is typical of all modern auth platforms. When you basically have some type of API that you're trying to protect, and that API is trying to access some type of secure data. Well, the way the protocols we use are OAuth, OpenID Connect, or SAML to do that. And the typical scenario is you have an application, and that application has to be in some type of security boundary. There has to be some type of environment that application lives in. It can be like a web app. That means you're getting to it via a browser. Or you have a mobile app. So your mobile device is that interface for that application. So you have some type of security boundary there that wraps itself around the application, and the user needs to access it. So what are they going to do? Well, the application needs to say who it is, ask who it is, and then you have to somehow get information to the API so the API can say, hey, is this good? And then it can give you the data. And this is the typical way all the modern auth environments work. So what we have to do is look at Entra ID. How is that going to work with Entra ID? What are we going to do here? So the first thing that happens is usually, and then this demonstration, this one I'm indicating here is an application, which is actually a web app here. The user wants to go to a web app, so they open their browser, they go to the application, and because ultimately they want to get some kind of secure data that this application is protecting. So the application needs to know, hey, who's this guy? Who's this actor that's trying to get into this? So what it's going to do is your application is configured to go to some type of secure identity provider, and this is Entra ID. So what the application is going to do is say, hey, you're not authenticated yet. I'm going to redirect you to the authorization endpoint. So it goes to Azure AD or Entra ID now, which is what it's called. And it's going to ask you for authentication if you haven't already authenticated. And then because it knows the application via the application ID, and it knows the protocol it's using because there's additional data that's sent when it redirects, that it knows what type of conditional access it's going to do. So it's going to perform some type of a conditional access, like looking at your IP address, looking to see what groups you're in, blah, blah, blah. And at that point, once everything's passed appropriately, then you'll get a token. And these are going to be ID tokens and or an access token. And so this is how all applications and APIs are secured, are via these access tokens in the modern security framework. The ID token gives you information about the user that has just authenticated. The ID token is only used for identity information. It shouldn't be used to access any APIs. APIs should utilize OAuth with the access token. The ID token really is there to give some type of presentation to the end user, like, hey, that's your picture, who you are, your phone number, whatever. It can change the application interface somehow for that particular user, and whatever's in that IT token, but it's not made to access any type of data. It's just there to tell you what the user is. And once you get that token, the application has been, Azure or Entra actually redirects these tokens back to the application. Now, there are different kinds of applications. There could be like a single page application where it's doing the modern auth protocol a little bit different, and it's just sitting there. Applications are just, they're wide open. They just sit there. So you have to verify the token. Just because that application gets a token doesn't mean that token is correct. Even an ID token, it doesn't mean that it's valid. So all the applications that you create have to have some type of interface, whether it's in the library that you write or do you doing it manually. It has to verify that token, that it's valid, it comes from the identity provider, that it's not expired, it's for that particular application. There are things you have to do to verify the ID token. But what you can get is an access token. And an access token is exclusively used to access resources. And typically what you do when you get that access token, you go to some type of API endpoint. And that access token is given to that API as a bearer token. And then what the API needs to do, again, is verify that that token is correct. And then the next thing that it needs to do after it verifies it's correct is look at the token and see, hey, is this token really gives me, is it really there for this API that is asking for information from? Does it have the right roles? Does it have the right groups? However you're determining that authorization with that API, it needs to look at that token to verify that it can do what you're asking it to do. And then if it's okay, it's going to grab the data and then it's going to bring it back to the application. The application is going to present it in some way in a table or files that you can download or whatever, but then the application then can return the data in a format that the user can utilize. The important thing to remember here, and I'm going to show you a demonstration of why this is important, but the Azure really, or Entra ID, is really involved only in the accessing of the tokens. They're not there, that you don't, there's no introspection endpoint. So it's not like you take your token and give it back to Entra and Entra says back and says, oh, this token's valid. That isn't the case. Microsoft does have some platforms or some development in progress where you will be able to, and in some of their some of their own apps, they utilize this where you can verify in more or less real time that that token is valid. But really, this is the only point where you're integrating with Azure. This is with Entra. This is where the control is at, is when you get that ID token and that access token. Once it's there, whether it's in your browser, in your mobile app, or whatever, then you can go ahead and use it for that particular API. It doesn't come back. Now, if you want to access a different API, then yes, that means you're requesting a new token, and now you have a new access token, and now you integrate with Azure or Entra. But this is really the only place it happens. It's up to your APIs, your applications, to really verify that that token is real and it has the claims that it needs to have in order to do the correct authorization. So there's a lot of importance in your applications and your APIs to really follow through with that security. Before I go into the demo, though, I want to say that if you go back here, is that we're talking about custom claim providers and custom claims. Well, that's what the APIs use. That's what the applications use. The applications use to determine the interface, but the access tokens determine for authorization into those resources. You might have you want your APIs to be able to control access, but you need information in those access tokens. And this is what the custom claims and the custom claim providers do, give you additional information in those access tokens so you can make those authorization decisions easier. So let me go into my demo. First thing I want to show you is that, and I do have an application here, I have this Blazor app that I wrote. Here's a Blazor app right there. It's just a single tenant app, but I'm going to show you some of these scenarios here. So the first scenario is I'm just gonna authenticate to the application, and I'm going to get a graph access token, and I'm going to show you what information I get from that. So the app is actually getting the ID token, and then it's getting a graph access token to get some graph information about the user. So let me start this. And it will come up in a minute. Here we go. So this is my app. It's a web app. And I'm going to authenticate with my dev account. This is my tenant. My tenant is OCG IDM dev. And this is my account. This is where the application is registered at. So I'm going to authenticate. Okay, so now I can show my profile. No big deal. We can see here that I'm getting graph information. But if you look at my Open ID Connect claim, my ID token, there's something here called my custom claim. So how did I get this? This is something that's not, that would be, you could do it before, but it's a lot easier to do that now to get these custom claims. I'm going to show you how I get the custom claim here. So if I go to my dev tenant here, and I look at my app registrations, I go to my single tenant app, and what you still can do, right? This is, I've registered this app. I also, what you used to do, you used to go into this token configuration, right? And add an optional claim, and you can add something to your ID token or your access token. And you can see that there's a limited number of attributes here that you have. Well, let's say you don't want to do that by that. You want to do it via department, like what I have here. I've got my custom claim 1, which is actually my department that I'm in. See, this is my department. I want to bring it in as a custom claim. I could have called it department, but I didn't. So how do you do that? Well, you don't do it here. So what you have to do now, this is the new interface that they have. I can go to my manage application. This is going to go to this app registrations representation in my enterprise apps view. Now what you do is you go to the single sign-on blade here, and this is new. This is something that wasn't there before. I'm not sure when they exposed this, but they do that now. So now the first thing you can do is, which is I think is kind of neat, you can actually go to the app registration. So now there's a way to switch between those two pretty easily. But the other thing here is the attributes and claims. I can actually add a claim. So this is my custom claim 1, user department. Let me add a new claim. So what whoops, I don't want to do that. I want to add a new claim. So I'm going to call this my title. And now we have the ability to grab attributes that are exposed. These are your Azure AD attributes. They're not all of them are there, but there are a lot of them. And I believe the extension apps probably show up if you have them. There's a way to expose the extension apps though, or the extension attributes. But anyway, I want my job title. So I'm going to do job title here. So maybe for some reason, this is in my OpenID Connect, my ID token. I want my job title. So I'm going to save this. So now if I go back here, I'm going to have the title exposed. So right here, it'll show up here. But what I have to do, because I have to get that claim, I have to log off and log back in. And you can see now the title shows up. So that's a really easy way to add additional attributes that if you want to expose them, if they're in your Azure or your Entra ID attribute somewhere in your attribute store. So that is not the end of the demos. I have more things to show you. So let's see. The next thing I want to show you is an API call. So I'm gonna, I set up another API that I'm gonna grab, and I think I wanted to show you something about this. Yes, well, this is really what I'm gonna do here. So I've got another API that I'm gonna call. One of the things when you're grabbing an access token via your application, you can't grab more than one access token. So if you have 5 APIs that you want to connect to, you have 5 different requests that you have to utilize. So I'm here, and now I'm going to show you my tokens here. Here's what I did for my application. Sometimes applications you want to utilize an access token as well as an ID token within an application, because that application somehow has an API internally to it. And I've done that with this application. If I go to my app registrations here, you'll see for this particular app, I'm also exposing an API. So I've got a scope. So I've got, not only do I have the ability to get an ID token, but I have the ability to also get an access token. So that is what you're seeing here. is the access token. Now, in this access token, because I made that change in my in the claim, the custom claims, because this access token is attached to that application, if I take a look at the claims within that token, you can see that I also have the same thing, my custom claim and my title. So they get the same information if you configure those custom claims in that application, and you also have to have an access token for that application. But if you're going to talk to a different API, like this one, this is my fake API that I've got an access token for, you're gonna see that the only thing I have here are the attributes that the custom attributes that I've created. I don't get the application custom attributes at all. I get the access token claim information that I configured for this fake API. And let me just show you that. And it's gonna lead into the next scenario here. I go to my app registrations. And I wanna look up my fake API. And then I wanna go to my enterprise applications and go to single sign-on. You'll see that these are the attributes that I'm exposing. So it's important to know that when you're creating these applications and these APIs, the custom claims don't come from the application. The custom claims that you configure actually come from the app or the API that you've configured. So there's no sharing. It's not like you get these claims on this this API here, or the application, and then you call another access token, or you get another access token to call another API. You don't get the same claims. You got to make sure that that you configure those claims at that app registration. So the other thing I wanted to say really quick is I have this graph access token, and you shouldn't use these tokens for anything other than what they're meant for. This format, you can't change any of this information in here, and this is only for like your graph API. You never should use these tokens. I just opened this up just so you could see what was in that graph access token. So the other thing I want to show you, which goes along with this, is the custom claim provider. So let me go back to my presentation really quick. I've created a custom claim provider here for that fake API data that some people may find it useful to use. In my environment, what I'm modeling is my OCG IDM dev is a development environment. People create APIs within that development environment, and they want to test it out. Well, they want to test it out with a real production user, let's say. They want the real user to authenticate, and then see what happens, see if the APIs respond correctly, if they get the right permissions. Well, if you've got a production user and a production tenant, and you have a prod dev tenant and a dev environment, well, you either have to create that user in that dev environment, or you create them as a guest user in your development environment, the prod user. And in some organizations I work with, that's what they've done, but they've had the problem of, okay, you've created this guest user that represents your production user, but I want to make sure those attributes match up, that they're in the right department or whatever, and they have to create some type of synchronization service between their prod tenant and their development tenant in order to populate that development environment so they can model their APIs. Well, what I've done here is created a situation where you don't need to do the synchronization. So basically, if you're a prod, not a prod, but a dev member user, then you're just going to go to the application and you're going to get that token, and the API is going to figure out what you need and then give you the data. What I've done with this custom claim provider is that if it is a guest user from the production tenant, then it's going to go to the dev tenant for authentication, just like guest users do. But then I've got this custom claims provider API that'll look at your production tenant and just read those attributes that you want to bring over and then bring them over to the application. In that way, that you've got this digital representation of this prod user who's actually a guest user over here, but at least now you've got a digital identity representation of that user. So let me show you this. Not this, this. I'm going to close these tabs and I'm going to log off. I'm going to log in with my prod user. Do I have him here? No. So this is a guest user in my dev tenant, but he represents a real user in this prod tenant here. Okay, so let me get the access token here. And I'm going to look at my fake API access token because this is how I've got that set up. And you can see here that I've got some extra attributes here that represent that user in that in the production tenant. So these attributes are actually coming from the production tenant, and they're not locally here. So I'll show you how I set that up. So in order to do that here, I'm in my enterprise applications, single sign-on blade, and I'm gonna edit this. And so I've created a custom claims provider here. It's got some information here. Well, this has to come from somewhere. This is not where you configure this. Actually, you go to the enterprise applications here, and you select enterprise applications, and then you have to go into the custom authentication extensions. So what I've done here is I've got this API that I'm using that when a user authenticates, this interface here grabs some of the ID token information, and you can grab that in this API. It's part of the body that's sent to this API. This is configured for you by Microsoft, so it's what they give you. And so what I do there is I extract some information in this API and say, okay, I know this person's a guest user in the dev tenant, and I know that he represents a real user in the prod tenant. So I'm just going to do a graph call and get all the information. You can do roles, whatever, groups, whatever. I just did those 3 attributes for a demonstration, and it'll bring those back. Well, that's all set up. You have this API that does this. And then you go here, and then you have to say, okay, well, what are you going to do here? And this tells you, you've got these attributes that I've made available via that API. and it's not like it looks at the schema of the other API that you've created. You just define it saying, hey, these are the attributes that I want from this API. Then the, the, the interface expects those. So I've got these three that I'm getting from that API. And then once I have them here, then I can add them here, because just because you've created this custom claims provider here doesn't mean that they automatically show up here. You have to actually add a new claim and select that, select it from here. See, you've got a way to get those custom claims from that API. So I think this is a really powerful interface here to be able to do that. You can get you can get those attributes from, like I did, from the graph, another graph called from another tenant, but you could do a database like SQL. You could do anything you want to, anything that you can write an API to that has that you can look up identity information. Then you can get that, bring back those attributes and use them within your API for some reason or another, or in your ID token. You can use them in your ID token as well. So. Let's see, what do I want to do now? I want to go to my next scenario. Actually, I want to go back. I did this, okay. Now I want to show you the other thing that not quite as impressive as the other thing, but basically the importance of this is to show, hey, how can you prevent people from getting to APIs or applications that you don't want them to get to, in particular APIs, because that's what I'm talking about, the token configuration. How do you do that? Well, let's go back to my application here. And well, first let me show you this over here. I've got a secure API, secure API. Secure API, secured API, okay? So I've got this set up, and this is just to give a person an access token to get to, get somewhere, get to the, get to a API. And so I have a couple of things here. I've got a couple of scopes that are available for this. The allowed to write, or just to read the data. So write and read, those are the two scopes I have set up. And this is my application that I'm using. I can get those things. So let's go back to my enterprise applications. Here's my secured API. So one thing I wanted to show you, I didn't show you, take my word for it, that I've created some roles, reader and writer roles for that API. And that's to control who can read and who can write. Let me just go back there just so that you can see it. App roles. So I've created these two app roles so that I can use authorization in my API. If you're a reader, you can read. If you're a writer, you can write. And that's how I'm going to control things. So I'm going to go here and I've got only certain people. I've got my admin account I'm a writer and a reader, but I've also got this group that's called Secure API Readers. And the only person that's in there should be Aaron Davis. It's okay, Aaron Davis is there. That's fine. It's good. So I want to log out. Sign back in, and this time I'm going to use a different account that isn't there. What is it, T-ROM? Oh. Okay, so again, he's authenticated here. My profile's here. I have the same token information that I can get here, but now I'm going to try to access the security API. And it shows me that I have not been assigned to that API, so I can't get it. So that's pretty typical, right? That's how you prevent somebody from getting to applications, is you're not assigned to that application. So no big deal there. So let me log out. And let me go to Aaron Davis. There's Aaron Davis. And you can see the same things. I got my tokens that I can get. But now I'm going to go see here. And so what I've done in this code, I want to show you that this is in my code. I'm asking for specific scopes here. That's not the one I want to show you though. Let's see, secure API access here. If you see, my first token, I'm only asking for the read scope. And the second token, I'm asking for the write scope. Well, I kind of expected, since I'm only in the readers group, and I shouldn't get this token here. I shouldn't even be able to get this token because I'm only asking for write. But that isn't what's happening. I'm getting both tokens. And this really highlights the necessity to actually inspect your tokens, because by your API, if this was a real API trying to secure data, what it should appropriately do is saying, hey, look at the scopes I got here. Maybe it's through a programming error or whatever. I've got the correct scopes, but that isn't what I shouldn't. And if I try to write, if I try to get that write scope and I try to write, I shouldn't be allowed to. So it should inspect the roles. So this roles is controlled by the API itself, inspecting this token, not from any interface that prevents you from doing something. So the only reason I wanted to bring that up is because I wanted to show the importance of really not only inspecting your access token for validity, but also that the authorization is really aligns with what the access token is asking for. So let's see, I think token inspection, that's what I'm talking about here. And I think that might be pretty much the end of what I wanted to show you. I want to basically say Entra ID provides everything to secure data access. And we do it through modern auth protocols. But if you want fine-grained access, then you really have to depend on these custom claims that you're creating, the custom claims providers, and let your APIs deal with that, deal with the authentication or with the authorization, not the authentication. And now, like I showed you, you can create custom claim providers and utilize custom claims within Azure. So that's all I have today. Thank you guys for showing up, and hopefully you'll find this useful. It's easy to play with. Get yourself a dev tenant or a a developer tenant and play around with it. It's great. Thank you guys. Talk to you later. Bye.